As long as you don't forget my camera. All right, y'all.
I am. Yep.
Okay, well, really not actually. Let's see.
Another day one after you all.
Not good. Had a close round against MSU.
The imposter.
The imposter. We're all.
You're SMS.
Yeah.
I know.
Irma, whenever he cuts cards and like assigning them, he's like Irmo-SMS.
It's just kind of
The
funny.
three of us are old enough that it was SMS.
I mean, it's kind of funny when you think about like the legal battle MSU had to like change from SMS to MSU. It's still continuing today because one of the things we conceded was, okay, we won't have any like graduate or doctoral programs without the approval of Mizzou, who was super pissed that we had changed our name. So now we're like trying to get that changed in the legislature.
Did you send out the one EC?
We sent it out, yeah.
Okay. I just have a whole bunch and
We sent it
sometimes,
early.
that's what I figured, but sometimes that's a yes, sometimes it's a no, so I figured it just says.
Can I get visual, verbal confirmation for people?
Oh, let me change that. I wasn't ready for the blue papers.
There's yellow paper too if you want it.
That's right. All right, I'm good.
Are we not ready? Advantage 1 is climate change. It is a cascading systems level risk. Absent action now, extinction, Rojak. 25, life on Earth is undergoing rapid transformation result in climate change. Challenge for substantial challenge to both natural and human ecosystems, human society, species thrive in a specific temperature range, speed over climate change, occurring outpace the ability of species to migrate or adapt to altering precipitation patterns, disrupt hydrological cycles, impacting agriculture, cultural productivity, extreme weather events become more frequent and intense, or cover hindered by changing conditions and concentrating carbon dioxide, rise significant portions absorbed by the oceans, warming oceans, acidification can create the perfect sort of dioxide, cascading affects the entire food chain, occupation warming twice as fast, melting of sea ice affects the entire food and fighting to reduce thin and cascade high traffic levels. Amazon, rainforest also rainforest prices at risk of becoming a net emitter of carbon. Climate change are putting species at risk of extinction, vulnerability, ecosystem underscores need for urgent climate action, and air-aft model climate models underestimate the risk currently spread. 23, warming has been faster and more extreme positive feedbacks not fully accounted for in models. IPC is only considered even 1 degree Celsius for circulating temperature points. All Arctic warming 4 times faster climate models underestimate amplification profiles and emissions feedback loops not accounted for to maximum for photosynthesis has been exceeded, and adaptation without mitigation fails. The world is warming too fast. Bloomer in John 22, danger of climate change around so rapidly they could overwhelm the ability to adapt less GHG and quickly reduce our efforts to incremental temperatures keep rising the world. Based on how much they can definition of fossil fuel emissions more will suffer unavoidable velocity of human. The best effort to adapt could falter rising CCC. What nations can afford, and studies agree that fossil fuel demand is elastic in the short and long term. Labranda and all 17 the paper comes in the mental studies. Estimating the price elasticity of demand of energy studies in journals employ commercial data to extremely high elasticity of those use aggregate models and industrial data. We conclude agents we have to price change in energy products through taxation give rise to a reduction in demand in the short and long term energy goods which consumption of vulnerable price things generally go to which other ways the environmental impact pricing policies are more effective, and every marginal increase in recycling directly decreases extraction. Takes it. In Peter 24, solar panels are recyclable. 95% of the value can be recycled. Recycling initiatives are crucial to reducing waste. Solar panels recycled. We save 95%, 95 pounds of emissions. Energy sources of recyclable as well. Battery materials can be recycled indefinitely. 80% of wind turbines made up of recyclable fuels already. And believe recycling continues to grow in 2021, and EDP and RNA preventing landfill 6,000 materials and material EDP and RNA. It's a nature-wide partnership with reuse oils along with recycling of scrap metal or recycling process contributes to a circular supply chain, and economic rationality is inevitable. Harnessing market forces through pragmatic performance solves better than utopian fantasies. Fleming in version 16, distancing from concrete activity remains opportunity to interview for the benefits of phosphorus system, whereby scopes apply grain for these to have little relevance, reflecting how finding materials to change otherwise. Why bother overly options to use harder language alter to institutionalized practices in the capacity to reorder governing affairs like profit maximization, substance will fail, the pressure of economic rationality instead become involved to construct new realities. Practical alternative can be achieved through pragmatism and incremental rather than radical piecemeal change to the more doable given economic pressure utopianism and to non-complex products and limit capacity to think and applicatively. Models like appreciation of the forces of guided behavior into the context include profit motive externalization mean insufficient cannot be simply talked about the capacity to form economic rationality differently be limited, which restricts host political subjectivity. We expect political performance to default, and climate advocacy is good but must be tied to sweeping top-down policy. And as we're 22, we won't come close to meeting targets. We'll hold the biggest lever available policy to self-employment and scale policy to change access. It is multifaceted discourse using more data to foster more specific action given their respective impacts to avoid the worst outcomes people directors their agency. Engaging civil scientists have been engaging with civil disobedience and actors would benefit and agree with even greater emphasis on people willing to galvanize precision participation, changing guidance and policy priorities that be effective strategic actors coordinating protect ways to engage policymakers take power action people lead become effective actors staying engaged in actions impacting effective policy advocate and $50 tax alone reaches emission goals pending. And Kennedy 21 car pricing the most efficient way to achieve commissions reduction command and control achieve only achieve emissions by half the goal of $50 tax pricing by 5%, you reduce emissions by 47% of 2005 the Russian needs to achieve mind spare. This goal and thus plan resolved. The United States federal government should adopt a $50 per ton carbon tax rising 5% annually with a commensurate border adjusted rate. Advantage 2 is debt. The rising ratio is unsustainable due to increased spending, interest rates, and programs. BGPF. 24 debt equal 90% of GDP. That 2023 severe parts related to continue to count primary drivers mismatch between federal state and allies medical drive with the spending aging population rising hospital cost spending to continue climbing federal rules. Revenues won't be his rising in 2025 because of the exponential provisions in tax and jobs act rates related to the rise of accumulation of debt will cause borrowing costs to rise, and that causes high interest payments to divert resources from productive investment, which slows growth and threatens stability. Hopkins. 24 the CBO expected debt to see this previous to 27 a diversion away from productive investment poses with geopolitical stability, lower capital investment, diminish economic growth, inhibit critical infrastructure, lowering income and slower growth, and never outcomes, central concerns in the U.S. will have an alliance to turn collapses and occur suddenly as the Fed takes in more debt, domestic credit is volatile, and the U.S. bond demand decreases, which increases borrowing issues. Stein. 23 debt must be repaid with interest and rates, interest rates, cool inflation, borrowing costs also way up the U.S. emphasizes twice as much to years of budget extra debt payments will gobble up the debt to rise in deficit, passing comments to deficit, holding growth in the economy, still growing pension asset. The interest rate of the U.S. debt is also trying to continue the rise of even more interest rates and mortgage rates rising at interest rates and rise because of the priorities while she's unwilling to absorb the interest of debt. Goes back to the economy while she breaks out with a lot of Russian U.S. government exacerbate issues and slow growth causes diversionary and expansionary war. Brands Beckley. 21 slowing growth countries waiting against his wife is finished with a way of grabbing their resources, being back more threat, causing violence, special rights, ready to neighboring countries in first. But it was also influence in Africa, fear of clients of the power motive expansion and conflict, collapses in civilization, extinction, and 31 extinction and humanity growth to destroy all species, conflicts, and other risk new global world has a danger attack all. Got to break down cooperation and nuclear agreements and mitigate accidents, risk weapon, kill everyone, or use technological optimal values or order to leave us more vulnerable disasters like pandemic and ballooning debt, causes investment in non-U.S. assets and high interest rates that crush the dollar. 24. Global investors include U.S. debt become unsolvable. Buyers will just choose non-U.S. assets to remain higher interest rates and debt with cycle higher interest rates, more risk, reducing growth, while further boosting interest rates and debt. The U.S. currency would fall intensify the cycle, reducing global growth and other promising. Transaction cheaper than current transaction is really rough and costly, and the stability of the dollar is key to running a laundry list of X threats is offer. 20. The dollars benefit U.S. companies and leadership as offers large shares. A large deficit of the real cost of fluids of the global economy and the military adventures and the ability to shift away from dollar to that world life financial stress demand for dollars push up the value against other currencies, enhancing purchasing power, reducing transaction costs. Americas will give the influence a critical moment. The U.S. uses the dollar to strike a blow against North Korea by merely putting the cutoff as actions of plan of war that rendered the nukes by sanctions the dollar central rules have been used to contain adversaries, and a carbon tax relieves the deficit from below. 23. Carbon tax revenue would help alleviate the federal deficit. White House budget proposed expanding for defense and immigration and tax revenue 2017 TTGA for households because of $400,000 your government accountability deficit. The federal government faced an unsustainable fiscal future committee for a responsible federal budget proposed a carbon tax reduction in the federal budget $200 billion over a decade, $49 per ton carbon tax reduction, a rate of net revenue $2.2 trillion over a decade, which should enable deficit reduction, and only the plan prevents snowballing debt from certainty. PWBM. 23. Current fiscal policy and sustainable large rate broad-based future corrective change physical values happens to stabilize the debt GDP ratio. That's correction. Actions anticipated financial markets to increase debt crowds out private capital formation lowers GDP and the size of tax bases more tax revenues leading to the towards stabilize debt relative to GDP and maximum debt to GDP ratio to percent even if investigally the ratio increasing in the future. U.S. debt is on cycle upward path. Pastors have underestimated that increase in admin implementation would be simple and administrative costs are minimal. Limited data proves the Kamala 21 excess half lower initiative cost of revenue ratio, the administrative cost of portion of revenue generally lower excess passing the upstream and Australia 1% allocated to admin. The cost of Sweden now 0.1% of the U.S. has made the cost 1.4% a year. 10 possible emission kind of the majority of the tax administration straightforward. The tax means assessing carbon emissions. Imported total use of fossil fuel since the United States cost of upstream carbon tax will cover 80% of emissions by fewer than 3,000 companies into a significantly smaller burden. The BCA avoids offshoring. Kamala 20 Radford argues that investment in developing countries make it a border adjustment hypocritical history not separated by percent as why no border adjustment produces Christian production in the country less from state in the U.S. where the not government without a border adjustment it would risk incentivizing shipping carbon intensive production in developing countries and the risk of turning acid border adjustment that punitive equals tax burden importing goods and devastating produce goods. The claim which developing countries would be complicated by well-designed border adjustment and carbon tax climate mitigation requires putting a price on carbon in the BCA would be cheap and easily overcome partisan tracking and preventing leakage. Pamela. 21 border system reduce companies set to shift to jurisdiction by the carbon tax requirement to track carbon emissions. The EPA requires businesses to report their emissions yearly. County reporting set to have been established public-private partnerships like companies that develop software solutions like product approach would levy a tax on the equivalent of the carbon tax and like domestically manufactured product produces the administrative burden close box the VAT costs and 1% until admin costs and prioritize climate change in decision making. 14 the business goal with endangered human rights we survive should be a first fundamental right. This is not philosophical legal. Nobody seems to signal that life of all person future could be annihilated like consisting for debating the rights of a ship taking action. Leadership is already taking sea water challenges like climate change hit everybody's working with civilization shifting authority, exclusive attention and intersubjectivity, adequate commentary on the graphic critical human critical theories, deep reluctant to address philosophical issues, critical challenge physical events kind of by hard times, so at advantage that this philosophy can work on first without first fear that the world should be shaped by trying to adjusting climate change risks to the point of moderate or interested in existence and responsibility for future generations doing mechanisms Robert Goes so that reassurance that life is meaningful, helps shed isolation, become partners in solidarity, humanities only apply to living human kind, morality, human access to fundamental rights and common have the potential strength to forward all acts within the community, legal frameworks not be more than great educational and the political struggle to stand these out models prove immediate emission reductions and renewable transition. Barely all 91% of the emission reduction in the electricity sector. The electricity sector corresponds to up to $50 per short. Fast-growing emissions reduction power sector only policy raise the cost of electricity relative to other fuels. Also encourage for this to run fossil fuel generation for local fuels. All the price trajectories cause significant shifts in fossil fuel demand. Coal consumption falls 85% due to the tax implemented natural gas, becoming 31% at $50 carbon prices. We'll see the smallest changes. Renewable energy shows significant increase of 300%. However, 55% plants. An announcement creates divestment. Manson 18. If you're motivated by profiteering paradox makes sense, but they won't pay evidence. Companies are pursuing such course more data for as more taxes appear. Companies will seek profitable alternatives. All the best of the strongest well known that fossil fuels are going to be more expensive. Carbon tax model shows that when carbon taxes are announced, divestment dominates the green paradox and extraction cost. Ensure phase out, fakes it all. 15 fossil recently because also fully carbon tax percentage structure lead to lower cumulative structure in the growth rate of the often carbon taxes. Then the interest rate in necessary condition green paradox, the annual growth rate is greater than the discount rate, and it needs to be immediate or watered down. Conway at all 21 corruption and the carbon tax formulation and adoption various city processes out into corruption and influence and development initiative where actors to weaken or limit the impact for carbon tax may involve granting rebates or concession for giving bribes. So the gas for providing political donation lobbying politicians should make a personal interest conflict with the ability to act impartially. That's cut at impartially. He'll send them out.
Are you good for prospects?
Of course.
Okay. I want to talk about the debt scenario.
Yeah.
Does the plan fiat that the revenue from the tax is used to erase the deficit?
Our solvency advocate says that the revenue would be used for deficit reduction to the tune of 2.2 trillion.
Are you talking about the Pomerleau evidence or the PWB evidence?
Yes.
Both of them? Okay, the Pomerleau evidence is talking about how it can relieve the deficit. What part of the card do you think says that it will 100% be used to relieve the deficit?
Well, we have made arguments that not only like offices recognize an unsustainable fiscal future, but that as this can be used for deficit reduction, that the proposal of a carbon tax would be used for deficit reduction. Quote, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget proposed a carbon tax for reducing federal debt.
Okay, but is that committee the committee that like gets the act through Congress? Is it the committee that is like, here's how you have to implement this?
That is the committee that when the USFG finds itself with more money, gives it suggestions as to where that money goes. We think it is incredibly likely that this is where the money goes because Congress would be suggested by the Fiscal Budget Office to put it into the debt. And obviously they're incredibly worried about it. Fiscal conservatives see it as a priority, and Dems obviously don't want it to collapse.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about the warming part of the warming advantage. What is like the time frame that the warming has to be solved by?
We think that the sooner we reduce emissions, the better. Every degree of warming creates more risk that can cascade into extinction.
Okay, but like, what's the point of like where warming needs, like, a bunch of people were like 2030s.
Our argument is that due to like the unpredictable nature of the system level event of warming, there's no like one point we can identify that is like this will kill us all. But we can say that there are cascading events that would cause bad things that might spill out to cause extinction. And we can also say that they are happening and getting worse now. The card concludes that we need urgent climate action just to like help ecosystems not be vulnerable, to stop putting species at risk of extinction.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about the PGPF card. The rising debt to GDP ratio is unsustainable. What like specific parts of like increased deficit spend? Is it like increases in deficit spending is the issue?
No, the card says people are getting really old, Medicare, Social Security, that federal revenues won't keep pace with those. Also, we have debt that we have to pay interest on, and we are only keeping up with that interest, not actually paying the actual, I guess, like part of the debt.
Okay, let's talk about geopolitical instability. Great power conflict, is it Russia, China, and the United States?
Are you talking about the slow growth scenario?
Yeah, the part that like talks about.
Well, it starts certainly with like the U.S. lashing out, but it can be other people too, yeah.
What is he said? Order is going ball of doom. It's like whenever my computer's not
beach
that's
ball.
what I call it. Just trying to get the visibility mode version. Oh, okay, wait, there we go. Alright, there was like conflicting copies, so it wasn't working originally. I'm gonna try and get that before. Just send everything out. Oh. Anybody not ready or need another order? Cool. First off is the oil advantage oil stability dependent on high oil prices decline creates the worst case scenario for the petrostate failure that deems regional stability and draws in the greatest powers. This is Dano in 19. Venezuela is on the verge of a failed state Nikki driving force of the oil. Oil is with a likely representing 90% of all exports. When prices fall, Venezuela plunges into a crisis where prices are low. Oil dependent countries experience great instability, refugee crisis, or breakdown that creates state exits for terrorist organization. Venezuela represents a worst case scenario and then devolved into the competition between the US, Russia, and China hotspots, and Latin America face higher instability and could easily fall victim to regime collapse in the next time oil prices fall. And successful climate policy crushes the oil demand perception alone snowballs this investment. This is bonus 23. Oil production is contingent on the stock reserves and very large and not depleted anytime soon. The margins that matter value drops as the demand shrinks with the dollar index investment declines immediately firms to anticipate the costly transition. There's no tax yet, so capital is more valuable. Production declines only slowly. And Latin American stability proxy wars that go nuclear carbonation 13. The principal concern for Latin America has been that the great powers exploit the weakness of the regional security and stability and provide opportunities for rivals for their security. Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran would establish basic conflict that will lead to direct confrontation with the nuclear power bases, enable military systems, electronic surveillance, ballistic missiles, and substation in Latin America. Powers may employ proxies in Latin America. Iran, China, and Russia may be cultivating proxies. And next up is the CP advantage. The United States Federal Government will launch trade satellites of the L1 point and 2, refrain from raising interest payments, and 3, purchase more bonds, and 4, print more money. Plant 1, self-warming solar shades, place of the low range 1 point self-warming tech is cheap and feasible. This is coming to 17. Changing resolution will be within a re-radiates, decreasing in the temp fleet, and the satellites are given the black side places executable. The tech exists. Multiple shades have the benefit of being redundant, or one shade can easily fix effects. Begin with the first piece, flexibility allows for immediate action. This is currently actionable sales of it can be expanded and contracted in unforeseen circumstance. Cube stats would be perfect with the shade material. Low durable caption can remain stable. Aluminum films have reflectance of 92%. Thermal spot bond ensure not unusable if struck by debris. The origami shades would maximize the shade and reduce the cost of the other. Wind chiller shades will able to shade the earth far enough that the any portion in isolation would decrease from a fraction of the percentage of the slab. This to presume the sizable repercussions. The cloud cycle will continue. A watchdog for room will react to changes. Isolation reduction can be halted or reverse. The telescope enable real-time feedback. Self-mitigation built into every system with a high risk minimization. Planck's 2 through 4 solve the rest of the basis for their advantages. The bulk of economics and modern monetary theory proves. This is Jacobson 20. The U.S. federal debt surpasses $20 trillion in MMT. Visa fears unwarranted MMT challenges the notion that the federal should balance its checkbook, and the only Federal Reserve can create new dollars, and therefore the Fed does not need to collect the taxes or sell treasury bonds. It's rather the way around. Americans must pay taxes. Dollars become viable. This is the primary reason for taxes, and if the Fed wants to spend big, it does not need to come up with the revenue. The Fed just needs to print. The largest purchaser of these bonds was the Fed, and making it voluntary default impossible. It could purchase all the treasuries tomorrow and retire the entire debt, and something Japan has already done. Next up is the KLMP. The money sees through climate change is a market failure response to a neoclassical economic paradigm that puts economics at the front of human lives. This is Reason 21. Neoclassical climate mitigation and rely on MPS such as tax certificates. Neoclassical interpretation is that the taxes to correct the market failure. Neoclassical not capture complexities of relation between climate and income society. Interpreting climate as an external neutralizes, since the main question boils down to determining prices. Neoclassical consists of closed system without the external impacts, and the alternative is to reject the paradigm of market failures and endorse a paradigm of law and political economics to replace the market-based instruments. This is Party in 20. Policy unable to generate growth and creating a cycle of care. The model growth of the collision course with the human existence and government enact a policy of the rich majority of legal scholarship and its the ability to address problems consolidated with problems of certainty, authorizing tutoring for courses to consolidate the lessons of legal fields and anchors descriptive of the normative law to prioritize those with more resources. We have become the scholarship of LEP rooted in a shared set of insights, concerns, and commitments analysis that take the political econ seriously. We look like we offer a broad reorientation toward neutrality and equality. Next up is the carbon bubble DA. The schools growing Vietnam companies are investing in CCS to stop the warming. This is Kimmel in 24. Cement and steel represent 14% of global emissions. These industries have no way to decarbonize without the carbon capture. SLV is trying to tackle the capture. We're comfortable with 12 to 24 months. We will be continuing to market. SLV CEO said carbon capture will be playing a leading role in the revenue targets, announcing $400 million to accelerate the deployment of the scale. Baker Hughes is targeting $7 billion for the new energy. By 2030, we're going to see tech be competitive. Chevron, Exxon building coast oil and gas plants emerging at the center of CCS. Exxon entered the agreements to capture the emissions for ammonia, fertilizer, steam, and industrial gas producer. Checks promised to remove 5 million tons of emissions annually, and instantaneously still reach across the huge emissions. But the rapid shock of a carbon tax causes oil and gas fires, and that crashes the economy and derails CCS. This is Costa in 23. Methodology would be most value and destroy the more agreements in a low carbon the snow wall in 14. Partially putting fossil fuels and carbon tax because biomass advantage and biomass is worse than coal plants and neutrality have been debunked and ignored the biogenic emissions. Shocking carbon tax bills say carbon tax would result in a conversion of all remaining forests to energy carbon monocultures led to turbine biofuels are worse because of land requirements. Biofuels result in vast emissions. Depletion of resources, biodiversity loss, conflicts, and hunger and carbon taxes with labor promotes these is not easy to close loopholes with biomass. Will trees be counted? What about the waste? How would a tax measure incineration? Landfills accounted for tax for biofuels gets impossible, and food wars is existential. Just COVID-19. Link between WMD and food under stress of the chemical weapons in Syria has act failure and the hunger nuclear conflict remains possible. Reaching stress to the nuclear fire was multiplying Russia, US, or France employ atomic weapons to quell the famine nuclear war cannot be exploded. Food insecurity drive the use of nukes and global famine is outcome of limited use of avoidable war between America and Russia most likely scenario for termination. And a carbon tax fails to solve emissions, GDP loss, a lack of infrastructure, litigation, minimal reduction is warming all our successes lowest in 21. Carbon tax would inflict losses on GDP, even aggressive tax would be measurable. Climate change affects costs exceed benefits. CO2 tax would exacerbate cost of less efficient policies. Global infrastructure needed to replace high levels of fuels with electric does not exist for federal permitting to lineage to allow renewable project with a 15-year CO2 tax, inhibiting competitors, increase prices, making fuels and business less competitive. Even a tax at $300 or $400 per ton would are only 0.1 Celsius warming and 1 centimeter of sea rise according to the climate modeling, and the risk is zero whenever it comes to warming. This assumes the IPCC. This is scrolling 23. Climate scientists now warning for apocalypse. Most recent IPCC means human extinction is not among the main chances of climate driving us to extinction very low, if not zero. Sponsors. Most recent climate scientists show encouraging trends in the world make the progress to become clear. We're not headed towards the worst case scenarios on their debt advantage. Diversionary wars fault. This is Carter 19. Diversionary and his mixed in cases are hard to reconcile with the political psychology find pervasive and cheap talks and it leads to citizens to leader favorability. I test 5,000 events in the most extensive data set across the administrations and crises of presidents to divert verbally rather than materially. Leaders have their cake and eat it too. They benefit from the rally without the crisis, and there's no econ impact. This is 1220. Diversionary war strikes me as unlikely even if one ignores the empirical flaws. It's hard to imagine a large-scale war where the debt levels are soaring and there are lots of easier ways to stimulate the economy. Downturns that could encourage war in this special circumstances. The U.S. has suffered 40 recessions and yet 20 wars unrelated to the economy. States do not start war, and thus they believe that they have a quick and cheap victory. Motivation for wars is security, not economic gain. And other solvency. A carbon tax can't solve the deficit. This is right on 17. Runaway spending and driving deficit of carbon tax would barely make a dent in deficit. Even an aggressive tax would come close less than 10% that would fall over time. And on their dollar hedge is declining down. Mars 21. Inflation terrifies people. Erosion of the value dollar dominated the debt threatening the dollar status as the world's dominant reserve currency. Whether inflation pushes next along with clear dollars reserve status is already under pressure, but it's enduring. This is 2s and 21. 2020 confirmed that the centrality of the dollar to the global economy and the U.S. financial influence is proving more enduring, and the Federal Reserve is a response and Jonas is the steward.
15 seconds.
Yeah, there is. We'll just do cross, yeah.
Okay, sweet. Are the advocacies conditional?
Hold on, I wasn't ready.
Oh, sorry.
Where's my water bottle? Go. Good, yeah, let's go.
Are the advocacies conditional?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oil prices, I don't think they're doing great right now. My question for you is, why is this unique if your evidence is from 2019?
One, if this evidence is specifically talking about how Venezuelan stability is dependent upon high oil prices. They have not declined to the point that we think it's dangerous yet. You know, also just bring up the evidence, we'll debate it out.
Sure, but like, your internal link seems to be about failed states. Your uniqueness evidence says civil unrest arises from systemic corruption, mismanagement of state institutions, political infighting. Why do oil prices solve those things?
No, the internal link talks about how climate policy crushes oil demand, or that's the link. The Krepovich 13, is that what you're talking about?
I'm going to move on to the advantage counterplan. How many sunshade satellites do you put up?
The evidence doesn't indicate how many satellites get put up.
Can you?
I'm not going to speak for the authors. The evidence doesn't quantify how many are put up.
Can
The
we
evidence
agree
just,
it's more than one?
Like, yeah, it's probably more than one.
Point four, do you print enough money to pay off the entirety of the debt?
The money that is printed is, yeah, we would probably print off enough to pay off the debt.
Okay, sweet. The LPEK, if not a negative externality, what is climate change?
What do you mean?
If not a negative externality of the market, how else would you characterize climate change? You've said that this framing is bad.
So we're talking about climate mitigation. So this is a critique of an MBI, specifically attacks as being a neoclassical interpretation, and we think that that's bad.
the neoclassical interpretation of climate change is that of an externality
No, the
program
NDI.
to correct a
Oh, the
market
NDI.
failure. What about positive externalities?
What do you mean? Like, what are you getting at?
I'm just gonna move on. The carbon bubble, how much econ decline do we need before you get to lash out?
So specifically, we think like a likelihood of a depression, so whatever gets us to a depression.
Your card seems to mostly be about China and Russia. Why does a shock in the US cause China and Russia lash out?
Because they believe that the United States is weak, because the United States' dominance would be harmed. That's,
The biomass dissent on case, where do you think this evidence gets to an internal link to say that we get to food collapse? It just seems that we say we have a little less.
it specifically, if you look at the EWAL 14, that has like the internal link, because it says that all remaining land would be transformed for biofuels, which means all like farmlands being converted.
Sure. The last thing I wanted to ask about, this like dollar hedge enduring evidence at the end, it seems to be about the Federal Reserve, not dollar hedge. How does this apply?
Are you talking about Morris or twos or something
Twos.
else? Twos. So that's specifically talking about the centrality of the dollar to the global economy. So we think that shows like global hedge because it's talking about the dollar in the global economy.
Cool, we're gonna take some prep right now.
Oh, these three.
Even though it says-
Yeah, they need it to be doing good.
Oh, sure, thanks.
Yeah.
You see the confusion.
Don't read the third one, let me read that.
Heard.
Yeah. What's this mean?
No, you don't.
Let me find the thing I need. Let me do the other thing and you do that thing, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Just checking something out.
Oh, wait.
Cool, 235 used.
235 years.
It's being sent.
725.
Thank you.
You know, you're in 10 minutes, Matt. This is something I'm not gonna miss.
The math that I have to do is not time math, so whenever I have to do time math, I just feel like I'm incredibly out of my element.
Okay. This chair. You got this now?
It's right behind you.
Order's gonna be advantage 1, advantage 2. Topicality. The advantage counterplan. The cap okay? The carbon bubble disadd, then the oil disadd. Is anyone not ready?
Just
I'm
one
not.
of that.
You say advantage one and then advantage two?
Yeah, 1, 2.
I just accidentally had them, so just want to make sure.
No, I mean, that's real.
Sorry.
Anyone not good?
I'm good now.
Cool, I'm gonna start. Climate change is existential. Accumulation of extreme weather events, drought, ocean acidification, food insecurity, and biodiversity collapse cause extinction of biological species from an increased CO2 content and cause nuclear fusion wars, which turns all of their impacts on all the carbon tax is necessary to solve barren and alternative 17 from the United States hyper-specific that is, I'm actually going to do that later. But answering the bioinvestment turn. First, bioinvestment is high now and reduces emissions down to 24. Attracts investment to 12 billion and depleted biomass plants and plans to have it the first and running up to 2030 to exploration of gases and means it's carbon negative. It uses bioproducts from trees, it uses lumber and wood for sustainable forest. And other countries are investing to outweigh U.S. biomass. No reason U.S. is uniquely harmful. Past 2025, developments are expanding worldwide. They're forecast a dramatic increase from Vietnam, Brazil, Malaysia, and Indonesia, where rainforests play a vital role in biodiversity use in Taiwan, and 5 billion in Japan, and 14 trillion in South Korea, 8. And I have that. Oh, a litany of supply chains issues, isolation, economic times, all check food wars in short, that's inevitable. Second is the Ukraine decks for global food security. First in 23, Ukraine industry restrained export restrictions as an increase of cost production as of 2022, and price increase to 34%. The war will keep prices historical high levels, exacerbating food insecurity. Wheat prices increasing in response to the export ban by India. India's wheat inflated imported world and offsetting lost exports by Ukraine. The war, the disputed transport of the exports that went through the Black Sea, not operational before July. The shelling has destroyed 880,000 tons of grain and destroyed infrastructure. Shortages of labor, destruction of equipment, and safety concerns of the severe impact of production estimates of from 25 to 50%. I'm not going to read the next card, but on the answering some steps, carbon tax does solve. Prefer Barron is a comprehensive study from multiple different authors talking about how a carbon tax is sufficient enough to solve for climate change, i.e. it causes renewables. Additionally, they've dropped the elasticity argument from the 1AC, which says that fossil fuel prices are incredibly elastic and reactive to carbon prices, so companies would immediately move off of it because of a carbon price drop means it's true, and they're placed undervalues in carbon tax. Van der Berg and Boltzmann 24. Bumster, Stoltz, Rosebein, Colbert, and Lindstein do not recognize the counterfactual more emissions without pricing, and the critics to be a little extensive literature and getting effectiveness and effective policies contribute to less reduction in energy need, even cost-effective pricing. The useful policies for a sector result in higher costs of the pricing control over all emissions of the economy. Price over the source, all carbon in the life cycle will be reflected in steering towards the systematic effectiveness. Cut that card to systematic effectiveness. The last thing we need to answer on the flow is the IPCC stuff. No, not us. One of these brands hyper-specific to criticizing the IPCC's use of degree measurements as a measurement of warming. We are not using that. We're using studies that instead focus on warming as a tipping scale itself, because it's an ongoing event. Natural disasters increase emission reductions are key to decreasing debt. We're going for dollar hedges. Key to check all the because so for 20 proves that U.S. officials use dollar hedge enemy to check all the threats by using sanctions and other instances to protect their interests and ensure that it doesn't escalate. That answers the diversionary war stuff. But the Walt stuff is we're conceding Walt no economic impact. There's still impact to dollar hedge, but it takes out the slow growth stuff, which means there's no impact to both the DAs and the solvency stuff. This is wrong. Assumes a much smaller carbon tax and a deficit in 2017 isn't accurate for current levels, so you shouldn't prefer it. It does solve the tipping scales argument. It's about creating enough money to access the market internal links that I'm going to to access market internal links and ensuring that there's an increased investment in the U.S. dollar. And we do need dollar hedge. 2 reasons. First, it contains other countries that the above sanctioned tariffs dampen threat because inability to shift away from the dollar. Second, influence enhances American purchasing power and reduces transition costs. The chosen card that they read is wrong and assumes 2020 levels, which is bogus, and I just don't have to answer it. T. First, we mean plain text and the vacuum. Second is account interpretation, clean energy policies, or rules in government used to incentivize renewable energy. Cascade 23 clean energy policies, rules enacted by the government to determine renewable energy, regulated, stimulate income of the forward carbon tax as goal. Clean energy policies advance the production and use of clean and renewable energy, reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Preferred. First is Afghan carbon tax is the core of Af literature. The overlay. Second is arbitrary. No evidence is intended to define or excluded, which creates race to the bottom. 3 is functional limits. States cap politics, beats most action, force reasonability. Anything else causes subsequent credit. And we obviously another we mean is that we obviously. disincentivize fossil fuels, but firms have an incentive to switch to renewables. This doesn't understand the economy. Advantage counter plan. First perm do both, second perm do each, the app and each link is, in theory, Kondo is a reason to reject the team process strategy and kills argument innovation is voted for clash and fairness and for on plank 1, first it's expensive to take too long to space variables, deck solvency, bucking 24, essentially critics melt them to bar the doctoral candidate, it would be astronomically expensive now to implement in time given the speed of the warming and the storm collision can damage the shield result of sudden rapid warming with disaster consequences, time and money would be better spent working to reduce emissions. I'm skipping that next card, but moving on to plank 2 and 3, which are incredibly wrong, is as the Fed takes in more debt, domestic factors become more volatile. It's 923 that did report with the interest as a central bank raised interest rate to cool inflation, borrowing costs have lead up to the year, some of it twice as much as 2 years ago, but experts warn that debt payments gobble up the government budget. The rising deficit is surprise economists because the deficit fall during periods of growth and the economy is still growing, and financials is tied to interest rates, the U.S. debt is yield, and Treasury continue to grow, likely to be the more increase in mortgage rates. Cut that card at mortgage rates, but plank 4 is wrong. Their own card, Boris from the case, proves that inflation is bad because and it hurts the dollar hedge. If there's inflation, the dollar is less valuable, so they can't solve for that scenario. And MNT assumes printing money only exacerbates inflation and decreases spending and investment. Bucket 24. MNT claims the government can never run out of money. Advocates argue that the government can always print more money into the debt. The caps, the classic example of luxury belief creates an imbalance between available resources and money. The result of inflation, Americans living paycheck to see the cost of living rise, leading to additional borrowing at high rates and historically unchecked money into printing and has led to hyperinflation, economic collapse. Cap. What do the offers the fiat application to the plan? They must have unique links in a competitive alternative. Anything else goes to arbitrations to the court of the debate that moves 9 minutes to the 1AC, which kills fairness and clash. Second is that the extinction outweighs and the common crisis outweighs because this is happening now, so we need to solve it. And positive externalities outweigh increase the speed of production and innovation. They didn't answer economic rationality in the 1AC, which proves that economic rationality is inevitable and the only lens in which we can use to formulate policy and alternatives. And
Means the alt fails.
Means the alt fails. And yeah, slow growth in dollar hedge turns the alt incoming fast and causes global nuclear war and the debt to G ratio rise, unchecked economic stability. It causes caps conflict by ensuring the U.S.'s power to sanction, boosts prevents global fragmentation, makes existential conflict more likely. And carbon dioxide prerequisite to the alternative only capitalism, not more like can solve the common crisis. Wagner and Weisman 15. It can be easy to conclude capitalism. The problem is change our ways to feel like clearly not enough confusing the issue instead of sticking to the mandate that the point is to carbon to capitalism and innovation and entrepreneurial powers are only hope are steering clear of common shock with less and if it can't work when priced to reflect the true cost channeled into duty guided by the price on carbon and best hope of the only thing can afford luxuries. I've talked about it, the conclusion for carbon pollution would avoid added no moral grounds not quite yet moving to a moral high ground. It requires having high ground is not an rising sea levels requires taking the economy seriously. And either way, perm do both. It shields net benefit and carbon taxes net benefit because this creates a sustainable economic market. And the alt fails because of transition wars. Trump and Musk aren't going to suddenly let an anti-capitalist revolution take over the government and destroy the means of production and take over the government or do any of that. And if they see an instance of an uprising, they're certainly going to crush it. We get new arguments based on what they do in the block cross-sects, which clear that they don't really have. Yeah, I'm not spending more time. Carbon bubble. They don't get this DA. The impact as per cross-sects economic collapse leads to instability with these countries, but we conceded the Wall 20 evidence which says that there's no impact to economic collapse, i.e. countries do not lash out when there's an economic collapse, so there is no impact. Otherwise, I'm going to answer uniqueness. They said CCS, so I will too. CCS is flourishing despite subsidization, Shelton, Thomas 22. Despite billings and supporting initiatives produce failure success stories of the prior to reductions of paper now correspond to overall pollution and funding based without oversight. Future CCS project remain revenue on credits to database quarter 15 channel projects, 10 projects between 2013 were expected only to remain, and uniqueness is not even close, almost having every project that failed in the sense of massive technical failures. Shaman 22, the DOE approved a $1.1 billion in CCS projects, and 7 of the 8 of them were abandoned due to high costs, and we cut that card at cost. But I'm going to move on to oil. Filter it through dollar hedge. We win dollar hedge. That means the U.S. can check any instance of Venezuelan aggression. Additionally, the internal link to Venezuelan aggression is economic collapse in Venezuela. So if we concede that defense, there means there's no internal link. When they make new answers, we get them. And OPEC cuts tank prices. Pricing 4.3. OPEC going through fall third reverse and cuts into the view of the healthy fundamentals. Easing at 411,000 BDP to the production cost of the OPEC vanishing single oil prices was already crashing before the announcement after tariffs. And tariffs jammed in 4.3 tariffs out for energy. Trump tariffs can't shield the collateral damage. Oil prices straight down, even though anticipated tariffs will rise globally. Demand concerns the global growth outlook and revise it downward to the fallout for low carbon energy sectors like wind and solar to face higher cost tariffs undermine a domestic supply chain. And
Yeah, there's no chance of great power drawn in Latin America more than 20. Latin America, not important of Africa, is unlimited. The human age, the geographical global growth of the Middle East, its largest energy reserve. Latin America's declining relevance, offering to promise impose a little smaller threat of the U.S.'s closest self-sufficiency, energy, drugs, intervention becoming unnecessary. China has turned inward and backed off. Either way, there's no link because it's a stable transition. We've read cards that it's easy for countries to adopt, and if the U.S. adopts it, others will too.
Before we start, which cards did you get on oil?
Sure.
You just tell me.
Yeah. First, Prosecute 4-3, Gemin 4-3, and the last card, the Impact Defense card.
Okay. The last card was the Malsin. Okay,
Yes.
cool. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, you're good.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
No, I mean, that's real.
Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and start cross if you're ready. Alright, so Venezuela, do they have the money to transition to clean energy?
We've made arguments that we believe that U.S. investment in renewables would make it easier for other countries
Okay.
to adopt it.
So let's talk Trump. Trump
Sure.
is cutting subsidies for renewables. How are we going to be, if we're cutting them in the U.S. domestically, why would we subsidize Venezuela?
So, yeah, I think you've misconstrued the argument. It's not that the U.S. federal government provides renewables to other countries. It's that the private sector's innovation in renewable technology makes it more
Okay.
cost-effective
So,
for other countries to
Another
adopt it.
question. Venezuela doesn't have private sector energy whenever it comes to oil and any forms of fossil fuels. It's all government owned. How is private sector going to invest in Venezuela if it's not private?
Sure. Yet again, we think you've misconstrued the argument. Even if you were correct that Venezuela does not have a private sector, it still has companies and interests in renewable and oil technology. We think the U.S. and our private companies could export those. Additionally, we think innovation.
Which private companies would export to Venezuela, considering that a lot of them in America don't support the government?
Sure. Yet again, we've simply made arguments as per the barren evidence of the 1EC that renewable investment in one country leads to renewable investment in other countries.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about the OPEC. Why does this thump uniqueness? Because it just says that they're trying to flood the market and continue things. That
Yes.
doesn't account for, this still accounts for a world where there
Yeah,
is no
so
CBAM
I think
from the
well,
United States.
Okay,
and a carbon tax.
two arguments there. First, one, none of your evidence assumes the EU CBAM, which is to come into effect in the next year, would obviously thump the link. Second, this card is hyper-specific to OPEC, flooding the market, which in turn causes a decrease in prices.
Okay, two questions. First, how much oil does the EU get from Venezuela? Because Venezuela is number one.
I don't know, we haven't read a card on it.
Okay, then why
I'll
are
be
you
frank.
saying that's going to be the thump? Because
You have said that it's-
we'll talk about it later. Okay. Were you going to ask a question?
Was Conda the only theoretical objection?
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay. So, continuing on,
sure.
no chance of great power in Latin America. From 2020, this doesn't assume the collapse of an entire industry that a country's, it's their primary
No, actually,
economic
we
stuff.
disagree
Why
with
does
that.
Okay, give me the warrant.
Sure, we don't, it talks specifically about your great power draw-in and internal, i.e. this is how you access nuclear war. We've said that doesn't happen via this card. It says that Latin America is just one instance of a continent in
Where's
which
the warrant though? I asked you for the warrant and you're just we don't think that, but you didn't give me the warrant.
No, you just misunderstood what the card has said. The
No,
card.
I'm asking for the specific warrant because then that way I'll understand it,
What
right?
warrant?
What is the warrant that specifically says
It's that
there's
Latin
no draw-in, whenever following an entire collapse of an industry?
Like industry in one country on one continent that the U.S. has interest in.
It's their sole industry
lists
for economic gain.
It lists a bunch of other industries and it says the U.S. would not get involved in any of those countries because it has other interests elsewhere.
10 minutes.
852. That's sent. I think it's sent. We good for an order?
Yep.
The LPEK. The bubbles disadvantage. The advantage counterplan. The first advantage. And then the second advantage. Is everybody ready?
My doc's loading, but
Okay. Alright, you got the gentleman?
Yep.
Alright, can I get a thumbs up from the panel? Awesome. The LPE can't concede the purpose of taking on the concede program both the competition. I'm not going for the argument the bubble disadvantage of conceding that it's not unique and that there's no there's no external offense for them to go for on this pitch. I'm not going for the argument. Go to the advantage counter plan. The counterplan solves 100% of the apps. Default insufficiency framing deficits must be quantified or they don't have one. Each one gets its own solvency mechanism, so I'll explain them on the line by line. Choosing 1 and 2 are perm, do both, and perm do each, but they are functionally the same argument. They link to the net benefit. No one does this counterplan adopt a carbon texture, which is the key distinguisher for the oil disadvantage. The second 2AC3 is conditionality. The first conditionality is do we get what we did? 1 negative flex, the negative is always react to the app. Is the 2 are an infinite preference to sake out 2AC strategy. Condo restores competitive equity. 2 negation. The neg was only disprove the app. Condo simulates effective negation by testing from multiple angles. Surgery pervades flash by insulating the case from contradiction. 3 innovation enforces smart 2AC choices, adaptation and logic. Your offsets 2AC process clarification and vague plans and impact turns app choices. 4 ideological flexibilitors are risk averse. Condo enables argumentative diversity and innovation which maximizes portable benefit. 5 reasonability add-ons. Perms and 2AC choice check. They need to prove and strategic damage or substance crowd outweighs. Their first their argument here is strats Q, but they make strats Q worse than good red. 15 topicality enters. Also, there's no counter interpretation of the 2AC, so they can't go for this argument. 7 reject the argument of the team. 8 judge K is a logical consequence of conditionality, and then 9 concede reasonability from T means you should prefer substantive debate. 2AC 4 and 5 are both deficits to the sun shades plank, but sometimes stop warming the source by reducing incoming solar radiation. Tech is rarely available and effects can be seen immediately, which is the 2 is the 1 to see Cummings evidence. The other assume sky wide shades and not specifically at the Lagrange 1 point. They need evidence saying that the tech is not feasible at that point and it would be too expensive to deploy at that point for this to be a serious argument. I'm going to do the MMT debate now. I'm not going for the second or third place, and so that definitely doesn't matter. The MMT solves the debt advantage. The government may not to challenge the checkbook, rather create new dollars that aren't spent illegally. That's the Jacobs evidence. It solves debt and answers 2AC5, which is Kelton. This is Kelton in 20. Your risk is person, the taxes to create demand for currency. Once Congress will authorize spending, the U.S. Treasury instructs the Federal Reserve. Hurry up, and Congress doesn't need to find the money. You uncle savers that need dollars when you collect secrecy. Doesn't keep dollars and Treasury solving residual deficit, which means that there's no risk of any of them. That's Kelton in 20. Your rights treasuries, whatever representative sponsor, now the will sell by savers fiscal deficit in hand, lead to using a smaller supply of dollar savings. And the inflation deficit, the 286 is wrong. It only occurs when government spending goes out of the policy, which doesn't happen in the world of the counterfeits. MMT works 24. The only purpose of MMT is that the government just spends money and prints money and spends as much as the MMT does not advocate that the government spends as much money as it is not a magic money tree spending is not inflationary. Resources back into production is inflationary to drive the for goods above. That should be reduced or at all right. This is why increase in response to positive spending, showing that responsive prices is flat or negative. The link between spending and inflation is tenuous, spending the little to no impact on inflation, and 2% increase in spending may lead to a 0.08% decrease in inflation. The first advantage. Extend 1 and C1 is the biomass term. Biomass is increased under the plate, cheap and easy to acquire. Turns the advantage. First is worse for emissions, then coal. They get massively expanded and make it impossible to solve warming. 2 it leads to land use changes of everything towards biomass accumulation, which destroys food security. 3 reliance requires massive land use changes, not enough for food and energy, soil degradation, water stress, and world hunger. That's Shaw in 21. Oh my god, scroll here. That was the possible deforestation, converting large amounts of arable land to compensation for food produced on unfavorable level that's severely impacting the food production rate, like selling longer food prices will spike, such as should maintain its rates. Existing environmental risks, soil degradation, water stress for the legal loan terms, warming bioenergy is a net increase in emissions and loss sequestration. That's Stoshik in 21. Making current this sequence carbon on all pathways and all that pathways to address climate, enhancing forest carbon sequestration, generally maintain sequestration, and that measuring carbon that lasts for decades, forest sequestration, for no source of emissions to us, immediately reduce emissions by powers of the opposite by power release, 370 kilograms of forest sequestration, natural power, natural gas emits 360 kilograms. 2AC 1 and 2 are both the uniqueness, or 2AC 1 is the investment's high now, it's just trying this into non-unique argument, but our uniqueness is only possible now. This is Morrison in 25. Emissions rate table unavailable, making it impossible to know whether fuels eligible for further guidance and fails to integrate practices in lowering the renewable fuels guidance is bankable or investable, actionable for biofuel producers from states and agencies, administration will not support sustainable reductions. They should orders to submit initiatives. 2 is that other countries thumb our argument, but this is not true because our argument specifically in the context of expanded U.S. bioenergy, they through a carbon tax. 2AC 3 through 5 are essentially all impact defense. So y'all do here multiple pathways circumvent defense, limited nuclear warfare, chemical weapons, and numerous investigators aren't assumed that's the one to see crib evidence and rigorous empirical studies confirm that our impact is correct. That's Coordinate 16. Also supports the relation between food security and conflict. The risk of conflict increasing where supplies are scarce, along with research scarcity and service and media manufacturer studies. Support arguments that access and availability are associated with increasing conflict plans. This is not sufficient to expel conflict. This present study confirms the systematic relationship between food and conflict. All models show change of 90% of profitability. And even without conflict, famine-induced states failures cascade, which ensures extinctions. Richards in 21. Special institutional risk factors, conflict, domestic feedback, and institutional fragility, mass immigration pressure, the destination of social rights and economic inequality. Societal class, internationally, see all the serious consequences of existential scarcity. So when I see 2 next, it's our solvency arguments. They don't solve carbon tax at levels of $300 to $400 would not be enough to even make a dent in emissions by 0.1 degrees by 2100. Before I was spreading off of climate models released by the EPA, which is the leading source, by the EPA, which is better than their models because our evidence is specifically in the context of how like emissions will evolve over time. It's the want to see Lewis evidence and regulatory barriers citing and permitting delayed decarbonization by decades. That's Malkin in 22. As you go for electrification will require a bridge to the greatest 60% increase in the manager's emission. It will need to be carry electricity, renewable oils to load center citing and permanent regulations seriously impede emission reduction. The lines was undergo since reviews multiple rounds in opposition from local stakeholders from locals and federal states. Lines using more than negative voters. Reductions mission line for impacts on property. Evaluates whether placing more strain on regulatory agencies and adequate capacity will be a major barrier to rapid deployment. Carbon tax fails to reduce emissions. This is CAS in 15. Carbon tax fails it would not to achieve a reduction would hinder lower emissions through emission supply. Supporters really can proposals over on the U.S. emission because reducing that amount to surrounding years. And our models are best, they show solvency is negligible. This were 40 and 21. Critical evaluation of the impact versus environment is inclusively present. Empirical person overcomes the identification challenge and can okay, not the latest results show higher price levels, only marginal reduction in forward. Results are robust across range of models and specifications, including several assessing technical trade pricing, even if globally it is on the leadership reductions that scale and speed to achieve the parents or even substantial reductions in all. Their only argument about this is that you should prefer the barren stuff because there's a lasting part. Our evidence is more like holistic in the view of how it is able to challenge, how carbon taxes are now unable to challenge emissions at all. Their next argument on this is that the literature undervalues, our literature undervalues the actual impacts of carbon taxes, but this does not cite Lewis or any of the other authors that we have read in the 2 and C, which means that you should disregard this evidence and not use it to evaluate the debate. I will extend 1 and C3. Here's the warning defense. There's no impact. There are 2 warnings from the 1 and C evidence. 1, climate scientists say that there is no chance of it being catastrophic. 2, trends are on the up and up. The world has made progress through small clean energy to prevent worst case scenarios, and the tipping points arguments that they use as a scale are wrong. That's Chloe T in 23. Here's one where I think 4 degrees out. And accidental with trade variation 4 degrees more likely. 3 degrees Celsius really lower, so 4 degrees high. So price don't say the logical impact is 5%. Likely, the rise very slow. 140 years for meter. Their tensions are so long that they match the infrastructure outlier or low living do not justify that spread. This for climate higher short cycles high. While adaptive societies thrive. Line says very little about extreme weather. They say that you should ignore IPCC and use of the degree stuff and prefer the tipping scale. But we have already indicted that, which is the code I just read. I'll go to the second advantage now. Except 1 and C4 are demons to the dollar. Hegemony stuff is declining now, but if the app can't solve it, inflation has eroded the dollar more than any other currency, then it's at a 25-year low. Let's see Morris evidence, but it's more dominant than any other currency in the world because it has become central to the world economy. That's the 2's evidence. It survived Trump and is suited for a multilateral order. That's 2's and 21. There was a fear of spreading politics in the middle of America, superintendents, the global financial system, and the caps over ramshackle, the rule of the dollar survived for 20 years. It's been reformed, that's increased steady by code as well. The U.S. message to me, never seen that access treasury once will $100 dollar continuing to play a predominant role in the international trade and finance, larger portion of economic activity, internal with the wide, so one can imagine dollar continue to play a dominant role. Dollars have been like democracy, wars, global currency, except for all features their first argument against this is that their stuff contains other countries and it's containing other countries, but that is our argument with the choose evidence. Their second argument is that it's about influence and that their card is newer, but our argument specifically in the context of how the trends in dollar hegemony have interacted over time, and also cryptocurrencies, mean currencies don't feel financial pressure. That's Harper and 18. Principally, the only for official created to occur with the coin will be a digital public into the ruble, the person of one exchange will begin to settle our accounts with counterparties of renewal representation of the arrangement. Iran, Canada, will be 2 million lots of Russia, out of low euro. The emission of Venezuela's national cryptocurrency potential will be backed by oil reserve petrol, help Venezuela overcome the financial blockade. Alex, I don't have time to understand this on this one. Sad face.
I'm good whenever you are.
I'm good.
Cool. MMT Works 24, I think I'm a little bit confused. This card doesn't seem to be in the context of printing $30 trillion, just in the context of printing money generally. Am I misconstruing the card?
No, you're not, but we think that it's more indicative of how inflation works in the world of MMT.
Sure, okay, that's fine. Twos, card on case, a little bit confused. How much did the debt increase in 2020? Your card just kind of generally cites, like, it did a little because of COVID, etc.
Let me pull up the ones real quick. The card doesn't like say how much the deficit raised in 2020. It's specifically in the context of financial influence proving to be enduring, though.
Sure, okay, that's fine. Cryptocurrencies, this article says nothing about the US, it talks about Russia and Venezuela. How does this apply to the US?
It's specifically in the context of what countries are doing in order to circumvent the negative impacts and externalities that they feel from dollar hegemony.
Have you read any predictive evidence that in this scenario the US would adopt cryptocurrency as its official
No,
currency?
it's not about the United States adopting cryptocurrency as a means to circumvent dollar hegemony. It is about other countries, and specifically gives the example of Russia having adopted cryptocurrencies as a means of circumventing sanction effects from the United States because the United States had the dollar hegemony that was necessary to provide pressure towards Russia.
Sure, that's fine. Warming defense, Mach and Lee 22. No, actually that's fine. Sunshades, I think okay. So, just so I make sure I understand this, or actually, where does the development of sunshades come from?
The 1NC evidence doesn't indicate where they are developed from. It simply states that by positioning sunshades at the Lagrange 1 point, we are able to prevent incoming solar radiation, which is more than sufficient to solve.
I know, but I'm asking you, how long does it take to develop sunshade satellites to do that?
I don't know the exact number. The 1NC coming evidence says that tech is already exportable. It's just a matter of doing it.
How much tech?
Enough to position them at.
Can you point me to the point in the card that says enough to solve for global warming? That we have the tech ready now?
Let me pull up the 1NC really quickly. It talks about how a fleet of satellites positioned over a given area to block
No,
sunlight
I'm asking for the line
is
that,
executable.
no,
The tech
okay.
exists. Multiple shades have the benefit of being redundant. If one breaks, it can be easily fixed. Effects begin with the first piece. Flexibility allows immediate
Sure.
action. This is actionable currently.
Cool, great. Yeah, I think that's basically time, cool.
There we go. One on our side, it's just the oil. I was about to say it's the counterpart. I was like, wait, that's not right. Nathan's been getting on to me because like my rounds keep blurring together, and he's really frustrated. He's like, how can we actually like talk about your rounds if you're just like kind of la-di-da what you're saying? I am getting better, but
We debated carbon tax.
yeah, I was like, oh wait, no, that's not the round.
We've also been, she's been extending process counterclaims, which is chaos.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. My eyes also just hurt. Ooh, where is my webinar now? Okay.
Good.
Okay, cool. Latin American proxy wars cause extinction involvement from China, Russia, and Iraq means any skirmish causes a direct confrontation between nuclear powers and affords the basis surveillance architectures and forward deployed ballistic missiles and it creates numerous pathways for escalation. That's the Kremlin evidence that we read for you and the one you see in maintaining high prices determines conflict globally filtering the case. This is Jang in 21. The linking of dysfunction to the resource both in factory industry and the evidence for aggression is quite weak and the results suggest that the association between oil and peace geopolitics rather than oil drives the conflicts and evidence is suggestive of the passport. And it turns the case because of warming. A. The local low degree paradox spikes the emissions to such a graph in 23. In response to the peak demand in the country, sell as much of oil before demand declines as a result of cleaner energy climate policy and deprivation reserves provoking panic and pump strategy before the window closes and filtering the belief that the oil war remains indispensable by rushing to develop the prices war. It leads to great paradox, prevent lower prices, slow down the transition. This is literally proven by their OSPEC argument because they saw that Trump's tariffs were coming and so they tried to put out as much oil as they possibly can, proving that the great paradox is true. If you try to adopt something like a carbon tax with a CBAM, that means that they're going to go ahead and do this just on a much larger scale because their industry will literally be collapsing. It's not enough, but I'll talk about that in the tariffs argument. Second, with the war towards warming, this is Marin 22. Nuclear exchange could be even worse if they use the gas in the field of the military operations, followed by the fossil fuel burn construction of very likely renewables depend on peace. And their economic and debt argument. First, the collapse of the Venezuela oil industry, collapse of the global economy. China, Russia, US all lose their primary exporter of oil. Whatever, they are not going to be able to have access for that. And lower prices. I'm not going to read that actually. Good evening, guys. Oil prices are high right now, so framing issue of us their distinct from obsolescence into Venezuela can whether their temporary losses, but oils are relevant to deprive them of their only economic engine. That's the Dino evidence. And when uncontested, the prices are holding. This is OEG 360 and 330. Brent WT crude oil futures getting above the cycle of the higher Friday and Russia-Ukraine talk could lead to an increased supply of OPEC Plus will implement cuts to offset the group's planned increases. Speculators have become constructive, driving by fresh value the largest weekly increase since October. The market is not overly concerned about the potential tariff impact, and expert consensus predict growth through 2030. This is Canaan 24. Experts anticipate oil to rise steadily until 2030, according to the long forecast rate will strengthen and peak in 2028. And coin price forecasts suggest pace growth until 2030. Wallet investor estimates WTI appreciates until 2029. And there's no warrant for why filtering through dollar hedge plus the DA is a story about how an industry is collapsing. So don't go ahead and buy it. Connor's case work on the advantage to prove that. So crossing supply in here, and also their OSPEC and the Periscope evidence rejected because there's an argument because it's about a 5% drop in prices following the shock of a terrorist. It's not in the context of an entire industry collapsing after the United States adopts a carbon tax and a CBAM taxing every single export that's going in there. Also, and let's talk about their tariffs. Their demand evidence. The tariffs are not high land, air, sea, land, cyber, and porous borders, the possibilities quadruple the most available and effective means is a biological Venezuela provides a sanctuary. Does anyone need a bunch of talk? I mean, I get marketing cards, but like what I did for you.
No, we're good.
7:25.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes.
Just look real quick. You can't, don't worry. Alright, 3:47 left. Send it out. And Jim is gonna send out a document, the order is going to be case in the order of 1-2. The advantage counter plan. And the oil just at the bottom.
You said there was a dock, right?
Yes. Did you write that number? 3:45.
So are these different? These through two of them?
Yeah, so one
Okay.
is.
Just ask this.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
No, makes sense.
Is it just one in our oil block?
No, there's another one called Send.
Well, I had that one, but then they said that there's two.
Yeah, the oil dock is at the bottom of this.
Oh, okay.
There's
What?
2 different documents for the 1AR.
No, I think it's just, it's coming up as one in our oil dock on my page. I just wanted to see if that was
okay.
what it was called. If
Yeah,
it-
yeah,
yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
one.
I was like, I didn't.
Yeah, oh,
say
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Good
yeah.
catch.
Yeah, you're right.
Not bad.
No, yeah, it's all good. I get it. I just wanted to make
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah, no, that's right.
Just 1 second, please.
Yes,
Good catch.
I'll start in a second unless I hear anything else.
We're straight turning biomass. They cannot turn the advantage if they are correct in the overview that coal, if biomass is worse than coal, that means it gets taxed higher under the plan, which means that they cannot articulate a link. Fiat outweighs the turn because green tech stops it from getting worse and makes food more efficient. Extend the twiddle evidence. Extend the investment is high now. Yes, it is from Britain, but they are investing in the U.S., which thumps it. Plus, it is impossible now. Their evidence agrees. That's purple. When it's doing Morrison, 25 clean fuels within a bankable investable or otherwise actionable for Trump will not support. Other countries prove our argument. The OECD Council evidence says Brazil, Indonesia, Vietnam, and more are doing it more. That matters. They are wrong. The CO2 does not have geographic barriers. It does not stay within the United States. It goes abroad. That's also reverse causally true. If they do biomass abroad, it affects them, which means that food wars is not offense they can wage in the U.S. But if we're straight turning it, that means either it's non-unique or we control it because warming causes it. Will be explained below. But food wars. But if we're winning the food wars, it turns the disad the impact Venezuela to their uniqueness for the oil disad proves that there is no diversification and they are on the brink of collapse. So if we win, go down to the solvency takeouts. Yes, filter through specific evidence of $50 and 1AC evidence $400 is not enough. It'll get there eventually, but they dropped two key pieces. One, announcement. The Matin evidence read in the 1AC says announcement creates divestment from fossil fuels because they know that it'll be less profitable in the future. The second thing that was dropped that is important was the elasticity evidence. The Brenda et al. 17 evidence says that fossil fuels are extremely reactive to price changes, key to carbon taxation. So none of their arguments can apply. The regulatory barrier stuff is wrong. Pablo in the 1AC says information is already collected, self-reported, and the EPA will be able to do what the CAS 15 doesn't assume the plan's price. The elasticity overwhelms its warrants because it's just generic. They said our models are best. It's incorrect. Their models are about everybody that's ever done a carbon tax. Ours are about people, about what would happen only in the U.S., so theirs are non-applicable to us. The warming defense. Climate scientists are aft. We critique the IPCC's understanding of tipping points. That is the Spratt evidence, which says models underestimated, so it can only go F. Trends are non-responsive. Our absent transition warming is getting worse now, and the science agrees. Taylor and all 24 numbers of which the absent erratic ocean deduction every degree will add to warming tip points and downward positive feedback past 9 2 degrees Celsius have catastrophic consequences for the hot house Earth's path. We see ecosystem simultaneously impacting and planets that are one in the world. Others break down within a single lifetime. Legal. Suggest countries adapt claims about the absence of extinction, increased major conflict, disease, pressure, vulnerabilities, and population risk specifics not enough to control trying to adapt complicated tasks, predict how it affects my cascade through complex systems, and system that can also have existential at the lower attempts. The last thing they said was time scales. That is a non-starter. They're increasing now. That was our Spratt evidence. They're wrong about extreme weather. It conglomerates into extinction. From the civil lessons, the systems level changes. The other advantage, hedge is resilient. The 2AC said that solves the Venezuela disad. They conceded it, not going for the advantage proper, so the fiscal meltdown stuff doesn't matter, but I'll explain Walt later. The advantage counter plan defaults to necessity framing. Anything else makes counter plans fall impossible to answer. Permutation do both shields net benefit. Their only argument was that it doesn't. So this debate is kind of a wash. Some say it's fail to solve warming. They did 0 line by line. Buckley doesn't assume one sunshade. Rather, it says they'd all be damage results in sudden rapid warming. It is comparative. It includes that money spent on the counter plan would be better spent on emissions reduction, shifting deck solvency. The Siegel evidence that they drift in a few years means that we have to continuously launch them. The deficit is emissions, and it takes forever. Scott 22 when the initial generation would be likely built on Earth deploying entire some 300,000 rocket launches spread over a decade. Transition to industrial launch space would occur slowly. The printing money stuff doesn't Doesn't matter. The oil dissat. Jameson, show me your computer. Warming out weighs and turns the oil dissat. It causes Venezuela society to collapse and affects them to the green paradox is too little, too late. The Matt evidence was and Frank's evidence were both extended above is about purely announcement, especially when the carbon tax is rising and elasticity. So the green paradox is a non-starter. You should view this like a straight turn, uniqueness, framing issue, prefer overarching recent evidence. It's the best to understand the current oil market, and we cut it this morning. We haven't read a single card from this are more recent about the effect that oil prices have. And we are citing journalists and experts. They're citing bloggers. The OG360 stuff doesn't assume tariffs. So talks about West Texas Oil Company that doesn't assume OPEC prices, which overdetermine global markets. Ukraine warrant is wrong. The only speculation, so they don't get it unless they prove war ends. The King 24 is outdated. Don't prefer it. It's by a blog and not a real forecast, even if it's a long-term forecast that cannot be predictive about the short-term, which our evidence is. Periscope is best and most recent. Don't reject the ARG. OPEC is increasing 411,000 oil now. Price is sinking, and Periscope is a writer for oilprice.com who has decades of experience. So you air aft prices free fall. Aspen through 4.3 crude and gas prices plunged. The trade war, the world economy, and demand S&P low. Undercut confidence prices plummeted. Undercut OPEC plus the boozing after reverse production and OPEC overproduction. Luxury 4.3 OPEC plus the rated output many opportunity to accelerate competition against back to the too much cut triggered by tariffs. And Yemen evidence is incorrect. Tariffs on Venezuela is killing oil industry. Prices are at an all-time low now, and that's down 4.2. Prices drop after fair trade war. Demand liberation neighborhood overturn the global trade negative for oil demand. Policy spoke inflation, slow economic growth, and intensify trade disputes. Inventories low is the only thing we're liberating ourselves from. Is oil prices cool? 4.2 prices of markets instead of tariffs. Announcement about equity markets about uncertainty. Breath rent WTI lost ground. Reversing gains and tariffs. Nuke them. Boosted. 4.3 tariffs have negative impact on oil and gas and the rival. Cost pressures self-evidently disruption economic ripple effects. Oil and gas relies heavily on steel tariffs driven cost of utility prices. 25%. The impact defense. They haven't answered our internal link takeout and said no U.S. involvement or great power drawn broadly because no one really gives a fuck about Venezuela. That's what the evidence says. Even if they're right about Russia and China drawing, that doesn't mean the U.S. does.
Go to the Walt menu.
And the Walt we highlight certainly cross applies. It says. It's in the other doc. We'll insert it. And concessions are true. They read all the things I said. It applies because it says soaring debt doesn't cause lash out.
That's kind of what I thought. I just need to make sure.
The oil decide, the advantage counter plan, and then if time, the first advantage.
If time, you said first advantage?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I would put it underneath your
No.
stack of papers.
Got you, just one.
So are we counting or oil first?
Oil.
Oh,
I got chewed out by Nathan one day because I did the advantage counter plan on the TMR first, so.
Crappy on ladies for chewing us out for stuff today.
Alright.
It's so
Is everybody good? The oil deficit outweighs in turns the case of implementing a carbon tax causes the destruction of the Venezuelan petro state through the crushing of oil prices to basically the increase of Latin American proxy wars. Keep typing stuff, please. Proxy wars that lead to the extinction by drawing in China, Russia, and the U.S., creating a direct confrontation between nuclear powers. We have given you several pathways to escalation, do things like forward bases, surveillance architectures, and forward deployed ballistic missiles. That's the 1C preventive evidence. So one in our 21 evidence is pretty good on the question of the internal because specifically using the context of how high prices are key to deterring conflicts because they serve as they are the key deterrent to conflict because it is what enables economies to run. If economies are no longer running in a world in which there is no, because of oil conflict, it means that they're, I don't know what I'm saying, just like trying to scratch all that out. It turns the case the climate advantage is the only thing they have, but the 20 arcs answers the green paradox, but it doesn't answer the war turns warming argument. This leads to proxy wars with nuclear Iran. That's the work I did in the overview turns climate because there's no way to solve for climate change if we are at war because there are other things that are more important to what is going on in the world of the advantages. They say the warming outweighs in turns. It's wrong because one, there is a massive time frame question. We are waiting that there's damn near immediate drawing of those powers, which is the preventive evidence, which means that they need to win a long-term magnitude outweighs, but that's not feasible in the world in which the counterplan is going to solve the case, but I'll get to that later. The uniqueness evidence, I'll start it here now. I'm going for the cane stuff. Oil prices will rise steadily until 2030. Prices will be around $115 by September of 2028, which is the peak point of growth, which could continue until 2030, which is more than sufficient for our arguments. They say that as a blogger, but get over yourself. They are citing massive amounts of data that should frame your ballot because it is indicative of trends from multiple sources towards the endpoint. They didn't collude in the process of coming to their conclusions, means that they are arguing this is the best frame because it's a comprehensive data analysis of what is inevitable in the world of the status quo. It assumes tariffs and analyzes the potential force of Trump presidency. It obviously means that tariffs were something that had to be accounted for. Their first argument, though, this is the recency famous that you should prefer consensus of literature that does a complete analysis 3 times better because it is a holistic evaluation of the long-term trends of oil prices. Answering the tariff stuff here, R1R, OG 360, 330 evidence does account for anticipated tariffs in the OPEC plan to sell more oil. What they fail to realize is that OPEC planned to sell all of that oil anyway and decided to uphold existing promises that attempted to maximize profit. The specific line that I'm citing here is the market is not overly concerned about the potential tariff impact, which means that their stuff is negligible at best. Yeah, all the 1AR push on this is tariffs. We're winning that there's not a large enough risk of tariffs to tank uniqueness for the disadvantage because all of our evidence is in the context of people doing analysis of like oil prices in the long term, which include analyses of tariffs. I will do the impact defense stuff here now. The Waldinger highlight has 2 key issues. One, the MMT plan guarantees that there is not a debt impact. The line that they re-highlight in the 1AR says that it is based off of debt, but the MMT stuff solves because it prints more money without spending, which is the 2NC card says is key. 2, they aren't bringing a recession now, which means that the conditions that Walt lays out for conflict to be an inevitability is not true because there will not be, because we're not in a recession now. The defense itself, is wrong. Warning doesn't assume instability from petrostate collapse. None of the defense they have read assumes the current break that we have highlighted between the Guyana and Venezuelan border crisis, which means that the region is particularly primed for war, which draws in powers. It's more than just economic collapse. So oil industry, which means that their concessions of money decline, not leading to war, doesn't mean anything. It's jobs. 90% of the exports are already unstable, and it's already the instability within that country's main means of profit. There's also the one in our due evidence, which they conceded, says that Russia and China have a clear stake in the conflict because they have tied up monetary investments within the region through Venezuelan oil, which means that the internal link for this is massively true. I'll go to the advantage counterpoint now. The counterpoint solves the entirety of the case. There are two simple pieces for me that I'm explaining here at the top. The first is sufficiency framing. None of the evidence have impacts to them, so you should assume that the points are able to sufficiently solve the impacts of the F. Two is judge case. The eighth one of counter from the two and see it doesn't make sense to vote after the status quo is a logical option. It just means that we would need to. It just means that we need to whether the distance outweighs the risk of the status quo being bad. The first argument is the permutation, but it's that at least they have benefit. The link to the oil that is predicated off of adoption of a carbon tax. Either of the points prevent wars between great powers, so there's not a risk of the permutation shielding that benefit. This permutation is specifically adopting a carbon tax anyway, so it would demand the collapse of the Venezuelan petro sale. Due to the sunshades debating here now, sunshades solve the warming advantage. They prevent incoming solar radiation, which is the root cause of any and all global warming. The tech already exists, so it is purely a question of deploying the technology, which is kind of in Felix and Lagrange 1 point. Defaults of evidence specificity on this question of solvency. The 2AC evidence does not assume the L1 point, which is the only point that we've advocated for and defended through the entire run. It means that they don't have evidence that qualifies why shades of the L1 point are bad. They don't have a deficit, and why is the reason why you should easily vote on this point to solve the warming advantage. One in R, one is that the damage means that we have to spend more money. This is incorrect. The one in R, the one in C coming evidence is explicit that the technology is feasible and cheap in the status quo, which means that this argument is wrong. It's one in R2 is that it's shifting deck solvency, but it doesn't assume a world in which deployable technology already exists and is cheap, which means it can just be re-fucking deployed in the first place. One in R3 is that it takes forever. Once again, this says not assume the coming evidence, which is that it'd be easy to deploy in the status quo. One in R4 is the deficit to this all is warning. They need to do comparative analysis of the one in R that says warning happens faster than the counterplan is able to solve it. The counterplan solves faster because the tech is so cheap and easily deployable. All of their deficits don't assume any of like the line by line or analysis that we do in the 2 and C. It doesn't assume the specific point we have advocated for, which is the L1 point. Like there's no way in which the counterplan does not solve the entirety of the warming advantage.
Cool. We have, scrolling up, 3:45. Starting now. Cool. Orders case oil advantage counter plan.
Sure.
Yeah, no, he's right. Advantage or case advantage counter plan oil. Is anyone not ready? Cool. I'm gonna start. Actually, let everybody put on this video. There is a top-level framing question for your ballot. They have dropped case. That means if I even win a 1% risk of a solvency deficit on the counter plan and a low risk of uniqueness means that there's no chance of the DA, then you auto-vote AF because, yeah, I'm going to do more on that later, but warring makes their impacts on the DA inevitable. Cards prove that it kills infrastructure supply chain and increases energy prices and makes it try or die for the AF frame. This is the debate through uniqueness. Your ballots will reflect the team that best controls uniqueness. I'm going to do a quick extension of solvency, but they dropped the Madden evidence, which is hyper-specific to how the announcement of a plan creates immediate divestment from fossil fuels, as companies would completely divest immediately. This is bolstered by the Frank and the elasticity arguments we've been making since the 1AC, which are hyper-specific to how companies would react to a carbon tax and why they would divest immediately because they have market incentives to do so. This has gone dropped, so even if you don't love it, you have to vote on it. It means you prefer AF on time frame for solving for warring. We've isolated, yeah, we're the only one who can get there. Advantage counter plan. You're going to default to necessity framing. I wasn't going to go for this, but it comes dropped coming out of the 2NR, so I have to. It doesn't solve for me. We get to weigh the whole out of everything else. Moves fairness in 9 minutes of the 1AC and ensures that we can't actually evaluate our solvency versus the advantage counterplan solvency. There's no judge kick. It was new in the 1AR and said, quote, reject judge kick. Makes the 2AR answer multiple words. There's a worse of fairness. It ensures late-breaking debates. Late-breaking debates means you should hold them to the standard. They went for a counterplan. You should stick them with it. And Sunshades can't solve warming. All of their evidence assumes that we'd be able to launch them quickly, easily, and cheaply, but when in word zero on how long it takes to actually do these launches, air AF, we are outcarding them on the question, have more specific evidence about the ability for these launches to happen in the first place. Kronk says was damning. They don't actually have any specific answers about the time frame of the rollout or how much they are actually able to produce via the Sunshades counterplan. And then I'm going to go for the 1AR Scott evidence. It goes drop. This is an emission deficit and a huge reason they aren't able to solve for warming, which means they can't access any of case. So 1AR Scott says deploying would just take 1 to hundreds of thousands of launches to spread over decades. Our evidence indicates that tipping points are much before then it causes extinction. The interim is such a worsen emissions. The not about L1 is unresponsive. They need to explain why our space-free solar storms or space rock collisions would apply here. Extend Buckley that those are inevitable and cause rapid warming disaster consequences. Preferred is comparative and concludes that money is better spent on things like the plant and deployable tech and cheap is not an answer to our argument that cheap tech and still has to be mass launched, which still means last launch in the interim. That easy is unresponsive. Their evidence only talks about how long it takes to start deploying them, not how it takes to finish them. Even if the Sunshades can't rely on a lower heat and shorter try or die flips after warming out waves and turns everything. The first thing you are going to do when looking at your ballot is look at the 1AR Scott evidence, which is hyper-specific to the huge emissions deficit, a time frame deficit, and a rollout deficit. If you cannot explain to me using the 2NR's words how they avoid this, then you are not going to be able to vote on for it. I've made judge kick arguments on why you shouldn't, why you should stick them with the counterplan, but if you don't, I'm still going to answer the oil DA. Oil. I'm finishing the uniqueness debate here. We're outcarding them we're outcarding them, I think 3-1, but math is hard. Framing issue. You prefer overarching evidence. It's the best to understand current oil markets. They haven't read a single card on overarching oil market. It's from this month, and so you're going to prefer ours on recency. I'm kind of confused about what they extended, so I'm just going to make it clear that the 1NR cards are shit. The old G3060 is wrong, doesn't assume tariffs, just talks about the West Texas oil companies, which is just U.S. oil domestically, doesn't assume global markets. We made an argument in the 1AR that you should prefer that as OPEC overdetermines international oil prices by changing demand and supply, by changing the amount of oil in the market. This is the best indicator of the international oil market, and the only one you can frame in your ballot. They have made no reasons why we should prefer analysis done by West Texas or the effect of domestic U.S. oil. The Kane stuff, it's outdated. Don't prefer it. It's a blog, not a real forecast. We're not going to get over it, even if they try and make arguments about holistic analysis. First, our cards are most certainly holistic. Cite experts and talk about the effect that OPEC has on the international community, and all of our OPEC answers got dropped in the 1 and the 2 and R because they spent too much time on the tariff stuff. Even then, the Kane evidence is most certainly in the prediction of long-term forecasting, but you prefer short-term forecasting. We made an argument that warming events are going to happen now absent the plan's immediate shift away from carbon emissions, so that means that you prefer short-term time frame. Even if the oil DA is to happen in the long term, you prefer the short-term interim because our impacts come first. OPEC proper, the partial evidence from the 1 and from the 2 is best and most recent. OPEC is increasing the amount of oil in the market by 411,000. This drastically decreases prices. I'm going to explain this incredibly simply because I don't think Missouri State understands it. When the amount of oil supply increases, the demand goes down because there's an increase in supply, which means that you can pay less to get more. This is causing a price free fall in the status quo. As for the 4.3's hyper-specific Dow crude prices plunged today because of a trade war, energy market killing. The S&P said that their confidence in the oil market is drastically low now. You're going to prefer this from 2 days ago and assumes the Trump tariffs that happen on April 2nd. This is key to understanding the overarching oil market and how OPEC is responding to the Trump tariffs. The only other. Cool. Impact defense. The war, they don't actually have any warrants for why war turns case. We made a time frame argument, means you can't evaluate it as a turns case argument. Even if it's intuitive, it's not in the 2 and R, so you definitely can't vote on it. Either way, we've read the card that they dropped from the 2EC, which says Latin America is so unimportant, Asia's current driver of growth, and China has turned inward and backed off. These are unique reasons that China would not get involved. Additionally, the card also talks about how the US would not get involved in the region. We're winning substantial uniqueness takeouts and a risk that the impact doesn't happen. This means it's try or die for the F because we control the closest in time frame impact, and the advanced counterpoint cannot solve for it.
Good debate.
Sure, good thing.
I'll do it this time.
Can we get card docs, please?
I already said number 1.
Yeah, of course.
I don't want to be on the chain.